You met many of these men.
I met these men, and I did not feel like they were prisoners or criminals.
Right.
I felt like they were your roommates, and these were just good guys that I got to know them
Right.
by name, and I got to know their families during visitation. I have warm feelings about this whole experience. Even though it was a traumatic experience, I have warm memories and warm thoughts about it.
Yeah.
And about the men especially.
Right. Welcome to another episode of Inside Out. We're so glad you're here. Today's interview is going to be emotional. We've got Mama Catledge in the studio today. Welcome, Mom.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yes, let's get the hard question out of the way. What's it like to have one of your children go to prison?
Whoa, that's a heavy question. You know, as my two boys were growing up, I used to think as a single mom, if I can get them grown without them dying or going to jail, then I will have done a good job.
Right.
And then, all of a sudden,
Yeah.
the son I would least expect to go to prison, all of a sudden, that's what's happening.
Right. We're gonna get into how that happened, and a lot of the audience knows the story because I've told the whole story. But we're so glad you're here. I want to back up a little bit and talk about you raising two sons and what that had to be like. Let's start with the day we learned that Dad was leaving. Okay, so you and Dad had two boys. You had a daughter that didn't make it out of the hospital, basically. So you basically had two boys, the two of you. And so the way I recall it, you correct anything that I've missed here, but the way I recall it is you're at work, you're working for a law firm, and it's a new job, and Dad is going to somehow take us to the movies and to our favorite restaurant, and I think he's taking us, and come to find out it's a babysitter he's hired, which is unusual. He doesn't usually hire babysitters, but we've hired a babysitter, and for some reason, he drives Charles and I and the babysitter to the movies. I'll never forget the movie. It was King Kong, the movie, and I remember this all being out of the norm, right? We're at the movies for several hours. It's a long movie, and then we're at the Mexican restaurant inside that same mall. And then she calls from a payphone to say, we're through, come get us. So Dad picks us up, takes us back to the house, the family house. I think we dropped the babysitter off on the way home. And then he sits us down. Charles and I share a bedroom, and he sits us down on the bunk beds. And he says, your mom and I are getting divorced. And I just wanted to tell you myself, and I'm leaving. I'm leaving today. And I'm 8, and my brother's 5, and we're there on the little bottom bunk as he's explaining this. And I remember, for me, being 8, the only thing I remember thinking was this pressure of, it sounds like I've got to be the dad of the house or something. Somehow I've got to be in charge. I'm 8 years old, but I just recall feeling the pressure of it. And so he leaves. This conversation probably took longer than I'm explaining it, but that's how I remember it. It's over. He walks out the front door and leaves. Now it's an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old, and the babysitter's already been taken home. And so I remember thinking, well, I probably ought to call Mom. I wonder if she even knows this. I wonder if she knows this is happening. So I called you at work. And I remember saying, hey, Dad left, and I guess you guys are getting divorced. And all the interior bedroom doors in the house were locked where you couldn't get in them, except for the boys' bedroom. And I thought that was weird. We couldn't open those doors. They were all kind of locked. It looked like Dad had maybe locked those from the inside. And so you said, do you recall this?
Of course.
You do? And you recall me calling you at work? And
I do. Well, one of the reasons I was at work is your dad had left the year before for a period of time and had come back home. And so, as far as I knew, everything was fine and everything was going to be fine. And then all of a sudden, I get this call from anyway, when he left the first time, I went to work because I knew I was going to have to support you guys. And so
you had not worked prior to that?
no, he didn't want me to work. So I never worked during the entire marriage until he met the first time. And then
So it was like a separation.
Exactly. So I went to work for the attorneys that I went to apply for a divorce with. And they hired me that day, but I put the divorce on pause
Sure.
when your dad came back.
Sure.
So this day when you called me at work, I was still working for the attorneys, and I was shocked to know
Yeah.
that he's leaving. So I said, I'll be home. So I immediately left and came home, and here are my two boys, frightened, not knowing what to do. What I did was I sat y'all down in the living room, and I let you know that Mom is here, and everything's going to be fine. We're going to be fine. There's nothing for you to worry about.
Yeah. Why were those doors locked?
Well, what we determined was that he had gone through the house and picked out the things that he wanted to take with him and had taken most of the things that were important. He had left my bed, he had left y'all's room, but for the most part, he had taken the furnishings from the house
Wow.
for his new life.
Right. Right. Okay. So that was kind of a moment for me that kind of began time. I recall it so vividly that it's almost like the beginning of my life, right? Because from that day forward, I felt like somehow I needed to be responsible for my little brother and almost a protector for you. I remember, again, I'm 8, but I felt that. I felt it strongly. And so let's talk about your career for a minute. I want to get into that. You're working at this law firm, having never worked for a lawyer. You don't have a law degree, right? You go to work for this law firm. As a paralegal, what are you doing for them?
I had been a legal secretary in Florida before I married your dad, so I did have a little bit of experience being a secretary, as they were called back then.
Sure.
And so when I went to apply for my divorce, they were looking to hire someone. So the attorney that represented me in the divorce hired me to be his secretary. And during the time there, I became a paralegal.
Got it.
And I did everything except practice in front of the judge. I did the interviews with the clients. I did all the paperwork. I just did not go into the courtroom.
So did you do that all the way through our childhood to pay the bills for the family, or did you change careers?
I changed careers as opportunities presented themselves because I needed to make more. You don't make very much in the legal field unless you're the attorney.
Right. So as I remember it, and if I've missed anything, you help me fill in the blanks, but as I remember it, you moved from there to working for a chemical company of some sort.
Yes. I worked for Velsicol Chemical, which had 7 manufacturing facilities in the United States.
As a legal secretary?
No. I had seen an ad that was some sort of a job that I wasn't quite familiar with, but it sounded interesting, and so I went in and interviewed to become an environmental auditor.
Wow. Okay, like EPA auditor type thing.
That's what the EPA does, is they do the environmental audits, and what my job was going to be the environmental auditor from our corporate level.
Okay, so the company you're working for has several chemical plants. You're an internal auditor for them.
Correct. To make sure we're in compliance when the EPA does come in so that we don't have any problems.
Got it. And what background did you have relative to chemical plant auditing? It sounds like a big jump.
Absolutely zero. I remember the plant manager there in Memphis took me through the chemical plant the first time, and he's showing me all the operations, the chlorine and all the different aspects of these hazardous chemicals, herbicides, pesticides, all of this bad stuff. And as we go through, I can feel my head totally exploding with all of this new information. And at the end, I said, how much of that am I supposed to remember? And he says, 0. I just wanted to familiarize you with it. Because my job was not really inside the chemical plant. It was going to be outside in their storage, their transportation, and the disposal of their hazardous waste.
I see. So you would travel, fly to the different plants wherever they were located, and conduct an audit that you had designed, as I recall. You designed an audit for the company, and you were basically deploying that audit everywhere you went.
the EPA had come out with regulations at the same time that I went to work for this chemical company. So these were all new regulations for the whole chemical industry. And I had sat down with the regulations and developed a checklist specifically from every aspect of the regulations to make sure that they would be in compliance if they followed my checklist.
Got it. Wow. Wow. So you're raising two boys. Now you're working at a chemical plant. What are you thinking? I mean, I know me and I know my brother. We were pretty, we weren't crazy, but we were certainly adventuresome. Yeah.
To say the least.
Right. So how is it you're managing all this? How are you balancing all this? You got these two boys. Just walk us through it.
Well, I wasn't at a chemical plant. First of all, I was at a corporate office, and I would go to these chemical plants. But as far as you boys were concerned, yes, it was a challenge because I would come home, you'd be on top of the house, there was just all sorts of things that I would find. I don't know if we need to go into some of the things that I found when I would come home from work.
You're not talking drugs or anything,
No. You were good, clean boys, but as far as adventuresome, whether it was with a car, whether it was with the kitchen fire, there's just all sorts of incidents that occurred with these boys while I'm at work.
Right.
And I had a neighbor who I let her know my boys are going to be here, and so she watched out for you, Miss Jernigan. She watched out for you a lot of the time when I was away.
Right. I remember our school. We would walk to school. I remember it was relatively close. I would say less than a mile.
Oh, yeah.
The walk to and from school. And I remember coming home, and of course, we'd be several hours before you were able to get home from work because you had these serious jobs. And I remember the chores we were assigned. I remember being assigned very specific duties. Like to this day, I know how to take care of a house because I basically at one time or another had done everything in that home, whether it be laundry, dusting, cleaning, deep cleaning. I'm sure Charles was as involved as I was, but I remember my duties, right? We probably can make this several episodes because I'm thinking of some of the stories that we probably don't want to get too sidetracked with. But as you think about watching us grow up, what were some of the observations you had about us?
Well, a couple of things, especially about you specifically, is that you were very meticulous. Your father was meticulous too, and so as far as at some point y'all had two different rooms, and you would always say, "Don't let my brother in my room, he's going to mess it up." You were very meticulous about things. You would come in from playing baseball and you'd want to wash your baseball. You were
okay, wow.
You were very meticulous. And as far as chores were concerned, I can remember specifically we had these big trees in our front yard, and boy, did these big trees make a lot of leaves. And so your responsibility was to go out there, rake those leaves, put them in bags, and put the bags on the street. And so you're out there supposedly doing what I've asked you to do, and at some point I go and check out the window, and it's not just you. There's a bunch of little boys out there with you, and I can see that you're telling them what they need to be doing. And so you're basically directing the work to be done. You had developed leadership skills very early, so these little boys were just following your lead.
Now, how old would you say this is?
I would say you were more like 10.
10 years old.
Yeah, 10, 11, somewhere around there. You weren't 8 at that time. You were older. So that's basically some of the things that I observed.
I remember that, actually, having a technique for how the leaves had to get in the bag and had to do it faster. And then I remember wanting desperately to be able to go play with the other kids and thinking, well, wait a minute, what if they help me wrap this up? We could play faster.
Exactly.
And I don't know why they were willing to help, but they were. And we did a lot of my chores. I had them in the house sometimes doing stuff, moving from room to room and dusting and vacuuming. And I remember we had a rake, which you may not recall. It was like a carpet rake for shag carpet. And you would drag this yellow rake across the carpet to get it to stand up where it looked nice. I remember literally showing one of the kids how to rake and don't do it like this or this will happen. You got to do it like this. I remember having these crazy explanations about my chores.
Shag carpet was really big back then.
Right. The popcorn ceilings and the shag carpets. Right. So Dad, I'm assuming, didn't disappear. I'm visiting, and Charles is visiting every other weekend, as I recall. We've got some type of, he comes to pick us up, and I'm assuming he's paying child support. And was there alimony involved too?
But that's another story. Do you want to hear it?
Well, I'm asking you, what was,
When I worked for the attorneys, his attorney had said, she'll probably get married again, so let's break this up. Let's do half alimony and half child support, and if she marries again, you don't have to pay the alimony. So, and I did marry shortly after that. So I was getting $300 a month for 2 boys.
So you guys negotiated some type of child support, but he paid it.
Yes.
Yeah, he wasn't one of these dodgers trying to pretend he's unemployed so he doesn't have to pay.
Nothing extra, but yes.
Yeah, but he paid it. Yeah, I remember sometimes bringing the check in. Yeah, because when he would drop us off, this is back in the day where you smoked everywhere. You smoked, not you, but Dad was a smoker, and smoked in the car. I remember,
windows up.
yeah, I remember those painful rides out to his house with the whole car filled with smoke. It's just crazy. Okay, so we speed up. I go away to college. I come back from college. I think my first job was probably out of college right here in Las Vegas. Right out of college, I think I came to Las Vegas working for the hearing aid company. Yeah, and then I only did that for a year, and then I moved right into financial services with I think our church bishop at the time, Chris, helped me get oriented into financial services, and I loved it. It became my path. Right. And so, speeding up just a little bit, I want your perspective. You move from the chemical plant company where you're an auditor to Avon Corporation, not as an Avon lady, but as a regional representative, which was, or district manager.
I was the district manager, I was an employee, not an independent contractor like the Avon lady who knocks on doors. I was in management for the Avon Corporation.
Got it. And so you had 200-300 of these Avon ladies reporting to you.
As a district manager, yes. And my first district was in Memphis, and then I moved to Utah, and I had a district there. So
how many years were you with Avon?
17.
All right, so that stuck. That you found your home there. Yeah. You liked it.
I loved it.
Yeah, you were sales training and winning trips.
Recruiting, training, and motivating was what my job was.
And I bet you were fantastic at it.
I was number 1 or number 2 out of 21 district managers.
Yeah.
The whole time I was a district.
Yeah, I can see that. I remember you setting up for these meetings where the ladies would come in and you'd be doing the training. I recall that growing up. One of the things that that I recall about you specifically in my childhood is somehow, and again, I don't know, maybe you can help me resolve this because I'm not clear about it, but I remember feeling supreme self-esteem or extreme self-confidence in a time where you don't normally feel this way as a teenager. I felt that way. And it was, I remember conversations you would have with me about my abilities. Now, again, I don't know if those abilities existed or you whispered them into existence or made me think they existed and somehow, you keep saying it, eventually it manifests itself. So I don't really know if it's a combination. And I guess I'm asking you now, that was really important and pivotal for me to get through what I believe is a time that you could be scarred emotionally, you could suffer self-esteem wise. I mean, I never felt that way. I don't recall ever feeling less than. I just don't recall it. And I give you the credit for that. I just want to know, you didn't have a manual for this. What was happening? What were you seeing? What were you making up? What was happening?
Well, I think primarily all of my life, I've always felt like I could do anything. Even though I was raised in a home where I wasn't encouraged, I made straight A's, but I was discouraged because my brother was, and I shouldn't brag too much. So I always excelled, and when I had children, I wanted to make sure they knew that they could do anything. I used to tell my ladies in Avon, you can be a pilot in a plane. Do you believe that? All you have to do is learn how. So I tried to teach my boys that they could be anything, they could do anything. All they had to do was learn how to do it.
Yeah, well, I'm telling you now, and I guess this is for single mothers raising children. I think you need to hear that and maybe rewind it again, because this worked. This worked. I'm telling you, I recall specific conversations where you were saying things to me about me that I didn't recognize except for you saying it. And I believed you. You had enough credibility as my mother. Not all moms have that credibility with their kids, but you had it with me, and you would say things to me, and I just bought it. I just believed it. And again, looking back, I don't really know if you're just an encourager, optimistic, positive, or you seen attributes and characteristics that you're wanting to point out that I can't see. Maybe it's the combination of the two. But either way, maybe all children have that light, and it needs to be pulled out.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I raised 6 kids, and I remember doing a similar thing because I was now trained in lifting people, lifting and encouraging people. That's kind of been my path too. And I remember some of them buy it, some don't. Some go for it, and some don't. And I'm just grateful you did that, because it made all the difference. I mean, I've been through some stuff, and the surviving the stuff, I attribute directly back to me at the core, believing in myself, because you whispered that to me. You really did. You installed that in me.
Well, I've tried to do that with my grandkids too. The reason I retired from Avon was to move here to be able to have an influence on my grandkids' life. I bought a house geographically between my 2 boys, 8 minutes from one, 10 minutes from the other, to have an influence, and I've done that for 21 years. But as far as you specifically is concerned, one of the things that you do with the child, and I did with you, knowing that you didn't have a father full-time in your life, was to be able to encourage you in the ways that I could see potential in you. I could see that you had the drive, that you had the leadership skills from a very early age. And it's just a matter of buying into that and letting you know what you have, and so that you can use it.
Yeah. Maybe that's the key here. I'm just thinking about the folks at home who are not eavesdropping on our personal story, but maybe trying to pick up some tips here. If you're raising teenagers, you've got to look for the good. There's plenty of not good. There's plenty of stuff to discipline kids over, right? Yeah. But boy, any light that you see, you gotta whisper it to them. You gotta tell them how that manifests itself in life. Yeah. How over time, what a difference that makes. One of the things you would say to me, and I remember specifically, and this may be completely made up, but I believed it. You said, son, you're rare. You're different. When you enter a room, things are different for you than they are for everybody else in the room. It's different for you. You would say this kind of stuff. Now, listen, there's no way to measure this. There's no way. Looking back, it sounds insane. It almost sounds completely made up. But you said it, I believed it, because there was enough other credibility you had earned that you would say stuff like that. And I totally believe it. And any comment on that? Do you remember saying stuff like this?
Well, see, the thing is, I would go to school for activities with you. I would go to church for activities with you. And I would see how the other kids responded to you. And it was always as though you were in the leadership position as a scout. And to eventually become an Eagle Scout, you were always the patrol leader. You were always the main young man in whatever group you were in. And it's not only the kids were drawn to you, but the leaders were too. They could see your potential. And it was just a matter of me just supporting that and encouraging you and let you see it.
Yeah, right. And it's the chicken or the egg, right? We're not sure, because obviously it begins somewhere. And I'm giving you, in my opinion, the full credit for this, because somewhere early on, and I guess for the young person who's got a parent willing to encourage them, there's nothing to lose believing them. There's nothing to lose. There's no risk in believing your parents when they start encouraging you and start saying things. I just had enough. And listen, because Dad's not around, I had one single voice I was tuned into, and it was yours. And those things that you would say just really resonated and sunk deep into my core, so that when I was out on my own, I believe that's who I was. And maybe coming up, this David Goggins, who wrote the book, You Can't Hurt Me, and his story's amazing. Many of you have read the book, I'm sure. But David Goggins says the way you build self-esteem is by creating brick upon brick of accomplishments, that things you actually do and achieve, and you lay it brick after brick after brick. And pretty soon, that's who you are. And the first brick may have been done with fear and trepidation, but that second brick comes with a bit of confidence because you've done it before. And that third brick comes with, this is who I am. That fourth brick comes, look out, because you're dealing with somebody that's serious. And so I think that's the key. It's layer. And as a child, you must have put me in positions that allowed me to lay the bricks, because by the time I left your home, I believed in who I was. I don't recall ever wanting to come back and live with you. I don't recall ever coming back going, is there room in the basement? I don't recall ever having a conversation about you paying my bills. I think about some of that stuff today that goes on, where people are still living in their parents' homes and they're grown. And I think, I just can't conceive it. In my mind, I cannot even imagine the weakness that would manifest itself in me if I would have to have that meeting where I say, hey, Mom, things are tight. Could you empty the spare room and let me move in there till I get on my feet? Those thoughts not only didn't enter my mind, I can't even conceive having those thoughts, because they would weaken me. It would make me weaker. And so I just want to thank you personally for what you did, laying those bricks early and putting me in a position to make that stuff happen, because it literally has made all the difference. All right, we speed ahead. I'm running a company. I'm running a big business. It's in all provinces of Canada. It's in 33 states. We've got the corporate plane. We've got the pilots. We've got the dream house. We've got multiple houses. You were managing some of these properties for us. Everything's going the way it should. We're stacking up gold bricks. And a business partner of mine decides he's not going to pay the investors that I've delivered to him the returns that were promised them. Now, these are my company's investors, and we've got several thousand financial advisors working for us, and they've made commitments that I've trained them to make, and it's all based on this relationship I have with this developer in the Caribbean. Well, we go 5 years, everything's perfect. Everybody's getting their returns. You've got your retirement money. Your money's in there. My money's in there. My wife's money's in there. My wife's parents' money's in there. Everybody we know and care about's money's in there. Everything's working beautiful. And then all of a sudden, the partner who you know and I know decides he's not going to pay the returns. And so all I know how to do at this point is to defend the investor. So we meet, you and I did it together. We go meet with the law firm here in Nevada, the biggest law firm in Nevada at the time, Lionel, Sawyer, and Collins. And we meet with the firm about, what should we do? Do we sue my partner and disrupt the project that all of our money's tied to? Or do we just hope they pull it out and begin to honor the commitments? And he makes it clear we need to litigate, and that his firm would like to refer us to another firm that can litigate in multiple jurisdictions, Canada, the Dominican Republic, and federal court in Florida. And so you fly with us on the company plane. We go to see the law firm that my local firm has recommended. You and the pilot go hang out in in South Beach while I meet with the lawyers. And this is another one of those days. It's as clear in my mind as the day Dad left. So we're at this big law firm, Diaz Royce, down in Miami, Florida, one of the bigger firms. It's an international law firm. They're prepared to litigate in multiple jurisdictions. And he says something. He says, listen, we're not just going to take your word for this. We need to hire private investigators and create a verified complaint so that the judge knows what we submit has been verified with facts and private investigation. That's going to cost you several $100,000 because we're going to fly private investigators to the resort to meet with their employees secretly to get the facts from their perspective. And I thought, okay, that's what a verified complaint is. I never understood the phrase. Well, I decide that we're going to now represent 644 investors in a verified complaint. Do you remember all this? This is you're one of the investors. So we end up suing in all those jurisdictions, which is expensive. You're filing litigation and fighting litigation with different law firms in each of those jurisdictions, all run by the Miami firm. They're leading the legal case. Well, after 9 months, the judge says, we believe a crime has occurred. We're not sure who committed it, but we're going to refer your case to the Department of Justice, to the IRS, and to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Absolutely. Now, this is the case I financed. Right. We spent, you wrote the checks from my bank accounts. It was maybe a couple million.
$95,000 a month is what I'm writing checks for.
Yeah, to this one firm.
To this one firm.
Yeah. So this was not a half-hearted effort to protect these investors. This was a full-throated financial commitment to protect these people. Well, when the judge throws it out and refers the case to the authorities, we now realize we need to hire different lawyers. And you and I are discussing all this. We're discussing, what do we do next? Who do we hire now? And Michael Diaz at the Diaz firm in Miami suggests you need a criminal defense lawyer because you've got money. They're going to come after you. And it's really not about where the wrong occurred. It's where is the money? We're going to go where there is money. And so I didn't realize the distinction between criminal defense lawyers and regular lawyers. I thought they were all lawyers. Well, there's a whole different breed of lawyer, right? Do you recall the day you and I went to Boise, Idaho?
Absolutely. It was a very snowy day, and we had stopped in Salt Lake and picked up the box from another attorney. Now we've got to carry it to Boise, Idaho to meet with another attorney to represent you.
Okay, let's fill in some blanks here. When the judge in Miami dismisses his case and says each of you 644 people can file your own case separately, not financed by Mr. Catledge, we now have lawsuits in like 11 states where they've named me and the developer together, right? Wherever the money is, they're just going to name as many people as they can to hopefully recover their losses, right? I get it. Well, I'm now on the defense, not on the offense. And so you and I have to go find an attorney or a firm that is hopefully licensed in all these states because we had been fighting individual cases with individual law firms, and it's getting crazy. I mean, the total we spent is $8.5 million.
I had a box full of files for different attorneys. I don't know if there were 15 of them, but it was a whole box full of files on different attorneys handling different parts of all of this.
Yeah, the total legal fees at the end of the day were $8.5 million on all lawyers defending us, defending my employees, defending the investors, and ultimately defending myself when I became part of the accusation class. Right. Well, we go to this trip to Boise was interesting. We go to Boise, Idaho. You're with me. It is Thanksgiving. I think 2010, Thanksgiving of 2010. And we're told there's a lawyer in Boise who happens to be licensed in all these states you've got trouble in. And we're thinking, wow, one lawyer is licensed in all the states I've got action in. We thought, we've got to hire this guy. Yeah. And I always thought it's the client's choice to hire an attorney, right? You kind of think that's the way it goes.
And he had high credentials too. I mean, this guy,
Oh.
we're not just going to talk to an attorney.
No, this is a serious guy who's been, I think, for Nevada, he'd been the district attorney or the
Even more than that, I can't remember what.
he was a senior lawyer for the government of some sort. But he was a very accomplished guy. Well, we go into his office and we got a little file box with our facts, right? Our proof. And we thought that was important. You know, this is the naive feeling I had, you know, that once somebody understands, somebody cares and justice matters and somehow the truth still counts. So we got our file box full of truth. And we show up in his office, and it's a humble office. There's 2 or 3 lawyers that work there. And this fellow's name is Monty Stewart. And a distinguished guy. I mean, just the way he spoke, he had a cadence about the way he spoke. And so he brings us back into his office. He says, I hear you're in a lot of trouble. He says, just tell me about the trouble. So we spend 45 minutes breaking it out. Yeah. And then he says this. You remember what he said next?
I actually do.
Yeah.
We go through 45 minutes of explaining everything, and he says, I'm going to take a walk. I'm going to walk down by the river. And we're thinking, what?
Right. We're in the middle of a heavy story here, man. What do you mean you're taking a walk? Right.
We got our box. We spent 45 minutes with you.
We've driven from Salt Lake to Boise.
Yes.
And he needs to take a walk. And I'm thinking, if you need to go to the restroom, man, just go. You know, he's telling us he's going to take a walk and then he adds by the river.
Yes.
And he says, listen, I've got to make a decision about whether I'm going to represent you or not. And I tell you what, I was frightened at that point because we needed him.
Yeah.
And I don't know where you're going to find another lawyer this esteemed, this highly thought of, and happens to be in all the places I got trouble.
Right.
And so this guy disappears. We're left in his office. He's gone for 45 minutes. And you and I are just sitting there talking to each other about is he meeting with Jesus? What is happening down by the river?
Yeah.
Well, he shows back up, and I'll never forget what he said. He said, are you familiar with the term evergreen retainer? And I said, well, I know what a retainer is, but I don't think I've ever heard the word evergreen in front of it. Do you recall him saying this? Yeah. Right. Because you ended up writing these checks.
Yes.
So he says, let me tell you how an evergreen retainer works. I'm going to take your case because I think you're telling me the truth. He says, but here's how it's going to go. We're going to go by my rules. We're going to hire a forensic auditor. They're going to work for my firm, not you. We're going through every dollar you've ever earned and every dollar you've ever paid out. We're going to create really tied down finances here so that as I represent you, I know what in the heck happened.
Where the money went.
Right. I'm going to know it before we begin any litigation.
Right.
And I thought, well, that makes a lot of sense. Sure. And I love that.
Nothing to
It's going to protect me.
Right.
And I thought, well, this sounds expensive too. I'm just thinking money, right? This is going to be expensive. And he says, it's probably going to cost $100,500. And I remember after they spent the $100,500, they came after us for another $100 because it was too much.
Yeah.
So $250 we spent on this audit of ourselves.
Forensic audit.
Yeah, and it was a firm, Bailey. I'll never forget these guys. These are former law enforcement accountants, FBI, these type of folks who come in and they interview every employee. They interview your bankers.
All the bank accounts.
My CFO. They certainly interview you and I. And I'm interviewed last. After they've got the facts, they then come to me to be interviewed to see if I'm going to tell a different story. It was very, very interesting. Yeah, because they begin with the idea that we're being lied to. And we're going to get to the bottom of it.
Right.
That's how they begin.
Right.
And then at the end of it, they were able to report back to Mr. Stewart. Sure. Everything's in order here. Sure. But it's binders of information. Absolutely. But the evergreen retainer, he says, here's how it works. Now, this is back 2010. This is a while ago when lawyer fees weren't as expensive as they are today. He says, you need to give me $25,000. And the moment I've spent 10 of it, you replenish it
to 25,000.
Back to 25. If it dips below 15,000 ever, we put our pencils down. And of course, that's the worst thing you could hear from your lawyers, that we're through working for you. And in civil cases, they can fire you. Criminal cases, it's a little harder because you have a constitutional right to good defense. But in a civil case, your lawyer can fire you if you don't pay him.
Right.
And so this $25,000 retainer, I mean, and these are good, honest men. They're not spending this money totally. This was I say it a lot, but the word advocate is what you hope for with a lawyer. You rarely get.
Yeah.
This guy was an advocate.
Absolutely.
Totally. Yeah. And I think it really helped that we had your retirement in this thing. As bad as it turned out, it helped in the legal defense, right?
Sure.
So we go through this. It's hard to hold a business together when you're having your own internal audit and the SEC and the IRS and the Department of Justice is at your door. It's very difficult to hold a national business together. So you're inside the business. You've got an eye on all the employees. My family's moved to San Diego. And so we're living down there, and I'm commuting back and forth with the pilot, back and forth to check on the business. That's hard to keep going when the people just want to know when their check's coming. You know, when is our investor check coming?
Sure.
You know, all these phone calls. So you met my business partner. What were your feelings about this fellow and his dad? And you went to the resort. I mean, you were kind of in this business with us. What was your feeling?
We met them in the Dominican Republic. That's the only time I think I ever met Fred and Derek and the mother. The mother had been with Mary Kay, and so I had been with Ava, and so we sort of had a rapport going there. I liked them. It was a nice family. I did not have any apprehension at all. Having met these people, I felt like it was good. I was at the resort. It was a beautiful resort. Everybody treated you beautifully. This is real. There's nothing amiss here. I just had good, positive vibes. And I usually have good vibes about things, and I really felt good about this.
All right. So what changed? What do you recall an event or a conversation? Maybe it was with you and I, but do you recall anything where your view of them changed dramatically?
When my check didn't come, I had put a large amount of money into this resort. The checks were coming directly from them, and when I did not receive my check, but a few days later, I still had not received my check. That's when your radar goes up, something's amiss here, and that's when I first had any misgivings at all.
Yeah. And you had been getting your check on time.
Oh, yeah. On the same day, every month.
FedEx.
However it came, I can't remember.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think they're FedExing the checks.
Yeah. But it came from them. You know, I was concerned because I did not have access to them.
Yeah.
I had access to you.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we were getting that same call from 644 people.
Right.
So you can imagine how scary that was.
Right.
All right. So the judge, when he refers this to the IRS, the SEC, and the Department of Justice, they began their own investigation. And they never came to the office. They never knocked a door down and took file cabinets or computer servers, like you hear all these crazy stories, right? None of that ever occurred.
No.
And I remember we hired a local criminal defense lawyer who was somewhat famous. I mean, this guy's well known in the criminal defense circles, defended a lot of
The celebrities who come to town, that's who they go to.
Right. This is probably the biggest name in criminal defense in this city, right, in Las Vegas. So we hire him. He's prepaid. That's how he gets his money. It's prepaid. It's not hourly. You get it all up front. You remember what we paid him?
Yes, I remember. Unless you become a target, it's this amount of money. Once you become a target, it's going to be more. Was it $1 million?
It was 1.250 total, but 500 of it up front,
Yes.
500,000 up front. And if you ever become a target of the federal government, that's an official designation, meaning we're looking at you. If you ever receive a target letter, you got to pay the other $750, and we'll take this all the way to the Supreme Court. We're going to represent you all the way through. You'll never write another check. We're paid. And so I thought, okay, well, maybe for $500,000, we can talk some sense into these people.
Right.
And we were so premature, we weren't even sure who had the case or was it assigned. So our attorney calls Washington, D.C., DOJ, Department of Justice, and finds out where the file is. And it turns out the file's been assigned to the San Francisco office, the Northern District of California. And apparently that's an epicenter for a lot of the clients. That was where a lot of the clients lived, is up there. We had a big branch up there, so there was a lot of clients up there. So DC had sent the file on me to them. Well, my attorney, within, I don't know, 2-3 days, calls me and says, hey, I got a target letter faxed to me today at the office, and so you're going to need to come up with the other $750. And I thought, boy, that was fast. That was so fast. Wow, you know, and it's faxed. It's not even the letter, right? Okay. So I said, can I see it? And I remember going to his office, and he shows it to me right off the fax. It was that curly paper fax. You know, I see this thing. And sure enough, they're investigating James B. Catledge for this fraud, this missing money. Yeah. They later, you know, used the phrase Ponzi scheme, but that's not what it was. But they did use that phrase because it's so sensational. Right. It sounds such schemish to use that phrase. Yeah. It scares consumers instantly. So now I'm a target of the investigation. Okay, and now we've got to actually defend ourselves because we're being accused of being a part of this theft. Now, the interesting thing here is, and you knew this because you were receiving checks, is all the money is made out to the Elliott organization. Our commissions come from the Elliott organization, and the client's yield or returns come from the Elliott organization. We never controlled the money, never had any influence over the money, didn't have the ability to scrape or scheme or steal or any of that stuff. The money's not in our hands. Clients write checks, they go right to the Elliott companies. Well, that's apparently not enough to evade indictment, because from 2010 to 2012, the FBI is secretly doing hundreds of interviews, not of me, not of you, but hundreds of people in our perimeter. And they do all these interviews, which we later get to read. They're called 302s, because anytime the FBI does an interview, they've got to take notes. Those notes are transferred to what they call a 302, and we get those as we prepare for trial. So everything everybody said, we eventually get to read, or at least the FBI's interpretation of what was said, because it's not recorded.
Right.
It's, I'm taking notes on what you're saying, and I may even be creative in my writing. So those 302s are the FBI's view of what was said. Right. So we get all those things. My attorney, David, gets us all those. And as we're reading them, some of these things are hard to believe. It's hard to believe some of the things being said, right? And eventually, we kept thinking, I remember you and I having these discussions. Oh, they'll figure this out. I mean, it's pretty obvious. Nothing's gone wrong on our side. We sued them. It's pretty, you know, it seems so common sense.
And if they want to know the truth, we're going to tell them the truth.
Right.
And we've got the evidence, and they're going to believe it.
And why don't you interview me? Yeah. And I've got the box of facts here. We're working around the regional Western United States with the box of facts. Are you going to come interview us? Well, they don't want to interview us. That would mess up their whole.
The truth is the first victim. That's one thing we learned.
Well, I did. We had an attorney that was a member of the club I belonged to take me to breakfast and advise me, and that was the phrase he used, which is so prophetic. I mean, it really is a great, profound statement. He said, James, I want you to understand that you running around trying to tell everybody the truth is not helping you. That the truth is already lost. It's on the floor. The truth is always the first victim in all litigation. Not the people, the truth. The people are all going to tell their version that gets them what they want. Right. And maybe that's based on fear, maybe it's based on greed, maybe it's based on they're mad, maybe it's based on their version of the facts. But the truth is always the first victim. Man, I tell you, that was heavy to hear. Because in my mind and in your mind, we keep thinking, okay, truth is all that matters in a courtroom. The bright lights of a courtroom are where you ferret out the truth. It's where everybody gets to come to understand what happened. That's why we have all the witnesses. That's why we're under oath. That's why all this matters. Well, that is not what goes on. So I'll get the call October of 2012 from my legal team, David and the two lawyers who work with David, Richie and Robert. And they said, James, I just talked to the U.S. Attorney's Office in San Francisco. They're going to file the indictment tomorrow. Well, I wanted you to have heads up on that. And when you file an indictment, usually an arrest warrant is issued at the same time. You're now going to be arrested. And so he explains to me, we've worked out an arrangement where you can get to San Francisco, turn yourself in, and they'll process you right out with a signature bond. Where you hear about people having to file their houses and their planes and all this stuff. My attorney, because of his hard work on my behalf, worked out an arrangement to let me sign a piece of paper that I would return for court. So you're also fingerprinted, your DNA is taken, and you are processed in and you're arrested on this indictment. Yeah. And the indictment is several counts of mail fraud, one count of conspiracy to commit fraud, and they're assuming that Derek Elliott and I are somehow in some type of cabal to steal money. And of course, the mail fraud stems from mail goes to the client with these checks in it. And you may recall this, but in every one of your checks, there was an update letter, right? Yeah. Well, I would tell the Elliots what I thought should be in the update. So I'm party to this mail. Yeah. And they've claimed it's a fraud, so it's mail fraud. Yeah. So, can't get around that. I was a part of helping advise the Elliots on what should be in the mail. Make sure you give them photographs. Make sure you tell them what's going on with construction deadlines. Things you would hope to see in an update, right? Well, so that indictment is a pivotal shift. I remember where I was sitting for that phone call in my home in San Diego. And I have to go out and explain this to my wife and to my older kids. They don't know what the word indictment means, but they certainly know what the word arrested means. And so I have to explain it, that it could be in the newspaper, because typically the federal government will release a press release on something like this, and it will hit the paper in the little town we live in. It will hit maybe the big paper in the surrounding town of San Diego. Well, it's a heavy day. We explain it. My wife is uncontrollable. She keeps thinking she married a smart guy. She keeps thinking she married a guy that would avoid these type of calamities and these pitfalls. And here we are. Her nightmare is being explained to her by her smart husband. So it was heavy. It was the beginning of the end for the marriage, for sure. So I remember us having lunch with a guy here in town named Tony, who said, I want you to be careful. This is the type of thing that'll cost you your marriage. And I thought, okay, that may cost you your marriage, not me. We're different. Well, he was so right. I mean, he was trying his best to warn me. He says, you gotta stay physically fit. You gotta take care of yourself mentally. He goes, this is the type of thing that costs people their lives. I remember him warning us at a cafe, like a Panera. I think we were at a Panera, and he was warning me that this is the type of thing that really gets expensive on your life. Yeah. And unrelated to the actual money, the expense. Well, I remember explaining to you that I'd been indicted. And this was, in our mind, it's almost like who's going to bail us out of this? Who's going to read the papers and decide that he's innocent? I mean, we may be beyond that now. We may have passed a process here that's undoable. I mean, you may not be able to fix this. I just kept thinking that pre-indictment, certainly that's when all the facts would be gathered and they would tie everything down. It would make sense. But no, they're going to proceed. They indicted Derek Elliott and they indicted me, put an arrest warrant out for him, put an arrest warrant out for me. They did a global search on him because he lives in Canada. And then they did I want to say an Interpol red notice on him, which means globally, if you find this guy, we're looking for him in San Francisco. But me, they had worked out a walk in the door, do the DNA. They had worked it out as a courtesy to kind of make this easy.
Right.
And I remember standing in front of the judge, it's a female judge, and I remember pleading. You got to plead the day you're arraigned. You got to plead guilty, not guilty, or no contest. And I remember it's affirming real clear, not guilty. And I've come to understand that even guilty people say not guilty. Right. Everybody kind of says that up front. But I thought this was the time, where, okay, it's on the record that this is where I'm at, where I stand on this. And I remember it taking years. I remember them meeting, the prosecutor and the 2 FBI agents who were in charge of the case. I kept thinking that they never even interviewed me. They never interviewed you. Yeah. I'm thinking, how could you get to the end of the road without talking to the guy you think's guilty of something? Unless you kind of have your own idea of how things went. Exactly. Right. So I remember being in the parking lot in San Diego. I dropped my son off he had a trainer preparing him for the football team. And he was working out with that trainer. And I usually dropped him off and then picked him up at the end. It's about an hour. And I remember scheduling a call where my attorney's going to talk to the prosecutor and the FBI agents about a deal. And we're going to talk about a deal, which sounds positive, a deal. We're going to make a deal. And I thought it was going to be to give them this truth box, right, so they could prosecute the other guy. That, in my mind, that's what a deal is. Well, that's not what a deal is at all. So my son goes in to start his workout. I start the conference call. I dial in, and I'm just to listen. I'm not supposed to comment. My attorney's going to talk with the prosecutor in front of me on the phone where I hear it, but I'm not allowed to comment. And I remember him saying, look, your guy's guilty. He's so guilty. We got all the evidence. I'm thinking, what? Yeah, I'm thinking, this is insane. I'm listening to an insane conversation. But this is my life. And I'm listening to them discuss how much time they want me to serve for a crime they say I committed. And I remember them saying 11 and a half years. We'll give him 11 and a half years if he pleads guilty to 1 count of mail fraud. And I remember David saying, and all the attorneys are on, but David's doing the talking. David says, this guy's last name is Schmidt. And he says, Mr. Schmidt, I'll need to talk this over with Mr. Catledge. Is that the best you can do? Because I can tell you right now, our firm's answer is hell no. And he said, oh, well, you probably ought to say that, but we got all the facts. We're taking this to trial. This is a terrible case. He's a rich guy. He got rich on a project that cost people a lot of money. I mean, I'm listening to this guy turn the situation to just such a nasty lens. And I'm thinking, wow, this has been so misconstrued. And I remember hanging up with this overwhelming sadness, just overwhelming. My son's working. He's about to get in the car, and I'm thinking, I gotta shift my mindset here. But David calls me immediately following, and he says to me, you heard what he said? I assume you're not interested in 11 and a half years.
How about 8?
Yeah. He then says, what if we could talk him down to 8? I said, David, how much time is the right amount of time for an innocent guy? Exactly. Sign me up for that amount of time. Yeah. He says, okay. He goes, I got it. We're not there yet. I said, no, we're nowhere near it. I'm not doing a day. Do you understand? This innocent client of yours is not doing 1 day. And I remember feeling so revved up about that. Little did I know how the system actually worked. I'm just affirming my position with this box of facts I have that I continue to save. I continue to save this box of all these things that will be used at trial, all these proofs that turned out to not mean much. Nobody cared. Nobody wanted his box. Nobody wanted the box.
I've got this plan. Don't mess it up with the facts. My goodness.
Yeah. The last thing we want is this guy on the witness stand telling us the truth.
Yes.
We've got this nailed down, and we got witnesses prepared to say what we think.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's part of the deal when they do these interviews. They're trying to assess everybody's temperament and who's movable, who's not, trying to figure out who's willing to work with the orchestra, who's not. And that's how they create their witness list. Well, so we had several more of these calls over the years. This lasted from 2012 to 2018. It went from 11 and a half to 8 to 6 to, this is years of tenderizing. We've even changed prosecutors now. This other guy's retired. It's a new guy in now, and he's worked up about the case, and he thinks he knows some stuff. And FBI agents have been reassigned across the globe. They're not even around. But my life continues to go on with this dark cloud over it. And I remember the day I'm in Atlanta. I'm doing it, believe it or not, I'm a consultant in this space. There's companies hiring me to do speeches, and with this indictment hanging, right? I'm so fortunate to have people that still know me and willing to let me help them with their businesses. Right. But I'm in Atlanta on an assignment for my career, and David says, I want to talk to you. I need about 30 minutes, and I need you alone. And I thought, oh, man. And so I know this is heavy. I go to the hotel room. You know, I'm in there alone, of course. And I call him, and I said, what's up? He's got all three. When all three are on the phone, it's always a sea change in the direction of the legal team. He says, James, we just hung up earlier today with the prosecutor. Reese is his last name, Reese. And we're about 2 weeks from trial here. Our trial date is set, and we're about 2 weeks out from actually paneling a jury. And I said, okay.
Go for it.
Yeah. A jury maybe will be interested in the truth in the box. He says, James, you do understand that 96% of all indictments end up in a plea deal, a plea of guilt. Not a plea of innocence, a plea of guilt. Guilty or not, 96% of all indictments end in a plea deal. In the 4% that dare take their facts in their box, their truth, to a courtroom, 86% of those are found guilty.
Yep.
So we're talking about 99.4% end up going to prison. Either they plea there or they're found guilty there. So I just want you to not be delusional about the reality that we sit with here, no matter how good our firm is. And I love trial. I love the courtroom. I'm trained, he says. This is my moment. This is my stage. He says, I think you'd be ruining your life. He goes, you could end up with 28 years. And you could walk around a prison yard explaining to all these inmates about your box of facts and your truth. And they will probably believe you. Yeah. And they're wearing the same clothes you are. And you guys could talk all about how innocent you guys are for the next 28 years. Or you can let me do my job and give you your life back. That's what I'd like to do. I'd like to take a deal that you can live with back to Mr. Reese, and I'd like to make a deal. Because I'm telling you, if we go to trial, I think they find you guilty. I'm just telling you.
Because they'll never understand the complexity.
You're rich. You got paid all the money you were due on this project. Even if it failed, you were paid. People are going to sit in that witness box with Kleenexes and talk about how their life is forever destroyed because you introduced them to a corrupt partner in the Dominican Republic. That's how this is going to go. That's how this goes. So let me do my job and give you your life back. I said, what's that look like? Tell me what you're proposing. And for the first time, in 6, 7 years, I'm open to what he's got to say. This has resonated with me as an important moment. And he says, I think I can get you 5 years. And I think you can do 5 years. He goes, do you know anything about prison camps? I said, no, I've not done any research on prison, David. This case shouldn't go to prison. So I've not even bothered to key in anything on the internet about prisons. He said, well, let me tell you how camp works. He goes, I got clients in camp. Here's how it works. He explains to me for the first time about a prison camp. And it sounds, frankly, like a livable situation, like something I can handle. And he says, James, let me argue for 0 to 5 with a cap at 5. So if the judge, who we think knows the facts here, we think the judge has read everything, we think the judge knows you after all these years, we think she knows you think you're innocent. And she may think that too. So why don't we let her make the decision, but we cap the government at 5 years? And I can get it in writing. He says, and if I can, I need you to say yes, because I can't go argue for that and then you say no. So let me argue for 0 to 5. And then I said, do I need to agree with their version of events? Are you asking me to stand in front of a judge and tell a false story? That I'm pleading guilty to some false narrative? I said, God, I really can't do that. I really can't swear to a false narrative. He goes, no. We got to come up with something you can live with. We got to come up with something you can say honestly. He goes, and that's your job, is to think about that. He goes, but let me go argue for this. And I said, all right, David. For the first time, I let David and his team go argue for it. I then called you. Do you remember me telling you that I've given them permission to argue for 5?
Right.
Do you remember that?
Of course I do.
How did you feel? This is your son. You've been on this journey the whole time. How did you feel?
Well, first of all, it was a long journey, and it felt like a cloud every day of those years because it's still hanging there, and it's the unknown. And then all of a sudden I get the call and you say, I could be going away for 5 years. And of course, my heart drops. I'm sad. I'm disappointed. I can't believe this is happening to my son, who has always tried to do everything right. He doesn't smoke. He doesn't drink. He doesn't do drugs. He doesn't hang out with bad people. This is the son that has tried to do everything the straight and narrow, and now they're saying 5 years. Oh. But I felt okay. I felt okay. 5 years will pass one way or the other. When 5 years is over, this will be over instead of hanging for 6 or 10 more years. So I felt fine. I felt like this is the right thing, and I felt calm and comfortable with it.
And you do rely on your instincts a lot.
But I always felt like I had what's called the power of discernment. I can sort of feel people, from first meeting, from hearing about things, whether I feel good or I feel, no, there's something amiss there. I've always had this instinct innately in me, and this time I felt calm, and this is going to be okay.
That's got to be a hard position as a mother, to find peace with the idea that your son's going to be incarcerated.
I didn't feel it at the moment, but as it progressed, I felt embarrassed. I didn't want to tell my friends my son is in prison, or he's going to prison, or
Yeah.
he's been to prison.
Yeah.
It was almost embarrassing.
Like a reflection on you.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
You always feel responsible for the choices your kids make, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't make
I totally get
the
that.
situations they find themselves in.
How did you come to, how did you square up with it, reconcile it in your mind that it's going to be okay?
It's just how I felt. I didn't feel anxious. I didn't feel the anxiousness and the sadness and maybe a little bit of sadness, but I did not feel like this was not the right thing. I just felt
Yeah.
like this is going to be okay.
Yeah.
Just like I did the day your dad left. I felt like this is going to be okay.
You felt that then too?
I felt that then too. It was horrible. It was traumatic.
Yeah.
But it's going to be okay.
You know what? I felt that way too on the phone with them. And when I called you and you actually said those words, I'm at peace with this. And that reassured me, because I know how important your instincts are. And they're usually right. I mean, I can't think of a time where they weren't. But for you to say I'm at peace with this almost reassured me. This is going to be okay. And so from that day forward, I began preparing to do time, which, by the way, like I've prepared for everything in my life, I took this on very seriously. I started meeting with people who had been in and out of prison. I started driving to them. I started interviewing them. I started meeting with them. I even made contact with people at the facility I needed to go to. I even hired a consultant to help get me to a specific facility. Yeah, I took this on like a career, and it made a huge difference. I entered ready. I remember on Easter, prior to being, to being, what do you call it, surrender, where you self-surrender. I was given the ability to self-surrender instead of being detained. I remember taking an Easter weekend and driving up from San Diego all the way to the facility that I knew I was going to be designated to, and sitting in that parking lot alone and literally trying to get my mind wrapped around the idea that I'm going to live here. This is a federal prison. I'm going to live here. Drove past the razor wire out to the back where the camp is, and it's inescapable, the visuals of a prison. And I needed to settle my mind on the idea that I could live here, that I could make this a home for 5 years, which is hard to imagine. You know what I'm saying? It's not like in a bad apartment complex. It's, and we're coming from mansions. I mean, we're coming from really nice living. But I sat there for several hours just kind of meditating on the idea that I could live here. I remember trying to peek around the corner, of some of the structures, and I could see some of the men inside there. It looked like a lot of loitering, standing around, like you see sometimes these poor neighborhoods, men standing on the corner with nothing to do, just kind of standing there. I remember making note that, will I be one of those guys just standing around, loitering, hanging out on the balcony? I just can't even see my life like that. But
there were no fences, and they just sort of wander around like they're on a campus. That was my impression, was that it did not appear to be like a prison with the wire and the fencing and everything. It was just wide open campus with people wandering around.
Did that now that's that because you came to visit.
I came to visit.
Yeah. How often did you visit?
I visited once a month as long as you were there. I
Right.
drove 5 hours from Las Vegas to Taft, California,
Right.
and 5 hours back. Well, I would spend the night. I would come on Friday. I could see you at 10:30 or something like that. So I would drive. I would leave the house about 5:30 in the morning. I would drive. I would come in. You'd have to leave at 3. Then I'd spend the night in a hotel so I could be there first thing on Saturday, and I'd spend Saturday with you until 3, and then I'd drive home.
Right. And you did a lot of things to make my stay easier. You managed a calendar to allow the kids to be up there every 30 days, even though they didn't live in Vegas. They lived in San Diego, but you would arrange the calendar for who would bring them. My ex-wife at the time, we divorced during this indictment period, and she was not willing to participate in the bringing of the kids to the facility. Just too much to bear for her, and I get it. I know her. It's a lot to bear for me too on the inside, right? A lot to bear for you. But she couldn't manage to get the kids there. So we had volunteers from the church, my church, willing to bring them up. And so once a month, I got to see mom, and once a month I got to see all the kids. And I remember marking my calendar. It was like the time was from visit to visit. Like I was literally marking the months. And so you'd spend the 3.5 weeks getting ready for the next visit, literally. And we would exchange lots of data on those visits. We had hours and hours and hours sitting like this, literally 8 hours.
Right.
And then you return the next day, it'd be another 8 hours.
Right.
And you just cannot imagine the joy, because the way they call you to visit is they call you on the loudspeaker. So everybody in the whole compound hears, James Catledge to visitation, James Catledge to visitation. It's like a loud, every speaker in the place says that. It means you're there, because I know who's visiting. And I just can't tell you the speed at which I moved from the housing unit to the visitation room, the excitement. And all the other inmates, they've heard that same message, right? So they know I've got a visitor. And it's a big day. It's a big day when you've got some inmates have no visitors. Some inmates are in there for years with no visitors. They get excited about your visits. Yeah. So it was, I got to tell you, it's the highlight of the time is the visits from those you love. And now listen, there's plenty of time inside for laughter, for storytelling, for joking. My ribs have never hurt more in laughter than they did inside a federal prison with inmates.
Yeah.
Never. The bond, I'd never been to war, never been in the military, but I envision those bonds that build so quickly under stress and trauma. It's similar inside there. There's a trust level. We've both been through this hard journey. We both arrived here, different cases, different scenarios, but it's been hard. And so you have that bond instantly across the races, across the age gaps, and you have a bond with these men. And to this day, I mean, I still interview men here on Inside Out who have done the time and have great stories to tell. And those friendships last.
Right.
And they're important to me.
Right.
They matter. You met many of these men.
I met these men, and I did not feel like they were prisoners or criminals.
Right.
I felt like they were your roommates, and these were just good guys that I got to know them
Right.
by name, and I got to know their families during visitation. I have warm feelings about this whole experience. Even though it was a traumatic experience, I have warm memories and warm thoughts about it,
Yeah.
and about the men especially.
Right. You ask me all the time about how's so-and-so,
Absolutely.
how's Dave, how's Jehu, how's Greg. Yeah, you ask me lots about how the guys are. There's, I don't know, several dozen men that I still keep up with that I love. And
We've had lunch with some of them when they've been in Vegas with their
Families.
girlfriends or families. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting perspective from you, that there's warm feelings about the whole experience.
Totally.
And I've got to say, for me, I don't think I would let you take it away. I mean, as difficult as it was, as expensive as it was, it cost me a lot. It cost a lot. It cost me my marriage. Obviously, it cost me my whole net worth. It cost me everything. It cost me reputation. It cost, but what it taught me was that my character is what matters, not the reputation. The reputation is what other people see you as.
Right.
The character is kind of what you've built.
Yeah, who you really are.
Right. And it's what I control.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is all my friends and all my relationships, both in business and private and church, and those all held up.
Yeah.
And now I have all these new friends that I met inside that I would have never met,
Right.
ever. I've never been in their neighborhoods, their communities, their businesses, ever.
And so many of them have come out, and they've got great careers. They're doctors, they're attorneys, they're
Yes.
they're
Great careers.
You were very successful people, and they were very successful in there. So there's this rapport with people who, for whatever reason, have found themselves in this location at this time, which was I find it was a good experience.
Yeah, for sure.
It's embarrassing to say it because people on the outside don't understand.
Yeah.
They see it totally different. And some of the people in there, one of the wives specifically saw it differently, didn't want her husband to talk about it, wanted
Yeah.
Skip to totally forget it. But he come out, I mean,
Yeah.
I did not feel that way.
Yeah, I didn't either. And it's funny you say that. I recall a Japanese inmate who was my first cellmate on the inside. His name was James also. And he and his wife had concocted a story for their whole family that he was at a fat camp in Germany. And he literally had a 2 or 3 year sentence. And he was at a fat camp in Germany. And of course, he's out working out every day trying to lose weight and get skinny. So this fat camp is working. And his wife held that lie up. And I don't know if they ever broke it to their kids. But this guy, I was there when he went home. And he wanted his whole family not to know anything about this. This was a shameful thing. And that he had been at a fat camp. I remember him putting, this is the heart of summer. And it's 110 degrees in Taft, California. This is the desert. This guy's got a winter coat on because we have a winter coat for the winter. He's got a winter coat on and like a toboggan hat. And he's taking photographs. We have a camp photographer by the trees. So it looks like he's in Germany at a fat camp. And we thought this was the craziest thing ever. But he was there's people like that that film. I'm not embarrassed at all. Obviously, I wouldn't be doing this podcast if I felt any shame from it at all. I know what happened.
Right.
You know what happened.
I know what happened.
Right. And so does so many.
Right.
And I even think many of the folks who lost money have squared up with me and let me know they too know what happened, which is invaluable for me to hear that. Any thoughts about the whole experience, that you'd like to share with the audience that may be important for them to hear?
Well, as far as the experience was concerned, as I said, it was a positive experience for me. I look forward to it once a month, to going in there, carrying nothing but my driver's license and a whole bag full of quarters so we could use the vending machine, because these roommates could not use the vending machine except on visitation day, and that was a big deal. So we would take as many quarters as we could, and we'd sit there and we'd share the vending machine food and rings and just visit. And as I walked in, I would pick up 2 pieces of blank paper and a pencil, and I would make notes of the things that needed to be done to continue with the business and everything outside.
Yeah.
Before I came back the next month, although James and I spoke every day, I literally was in there with him every single day of his incarceration, because we were in communication and we were doing everything we could to find a way to make this less time than what was set out to be. And it turned out to be that way thanks to COVID and the First Step Act, which was very influential in this incarceration program, and hopefully it's going to continue for the other guys. But I had no hard feelings about it. I still feel some embarrassment for sharing it with people that I know, but other than that, it was a good experience. And one of the things that I've always lived by, this is a quote I've always lived by, this too will pass. And if you look at it that way, it may be 5 years, but 5 years are going to come and go, and this too will pass, and then we'll continue on. So if you live like that, knowing no matter what the situation you're in right now, it's not permanent, this too will pass.
Yeah, I think you're a good example of that. As you were saying that, I was thinking about the quote that it's not what happens to you, but what you do when it happens to you. It's what you do next. It's how you react and respond to what's happening to you. That is all that matters. It's not, because a lot of things are going to happen to you. As you know, from the divorce all the way through your life, things happen to us, and we can't always control them. No. Even if we are meticulous, even if we are control freaks, even if our life is somewhat in order, there's still going to be some things that happen.
Out of our control.
Right. External forces, we're all vulnerable to external forces. And I think you've lived your life that way. Mom, I want to thank you for doing this interview. This has been hard to get you to the studio. We've talked about this for a long time, and your health is such that it made it possible to get you here. And I just want to thank you for doing this interview.
You're welcome. I've enjoyed it, James, and I love you with all my heart.
I love you too, Mom. Thank you.